neon steel and neon sculpture. When it's fully functioning, it lights up and spins. The text says it's in the PI around the middle. It is a landmark here in Seattle, and there is negotiations between the Museum of History and Industry and the city itself to find a new home and get it fully refurbished. Now, if you look up past the waterfront, there is a steep hill up there. It's got 3 red and white radio antennas on the top. That's Queen Anne Hill. Queen Anne Hill was originally known as Eden Hill. It was one of the original 7 hills of Seattle, the fabled 7 hills. Like Rome, Seattle was supposed to have been built on 7 hills. Today there are roughly 6 of them around because we decided to wash one of those hills down here into the bay. They took mining hoses and washed the entire hill down. It was called Denny Hill. Now it's called the Denny Regrade. It was roughly where the Space Needle is now. Now Queen Anne Hill didn't become Queen Anne Hill until after the Great Fire of Seattle, downtown Seattle in 1889. When the more affluent residents of the downtown area didn't want to deal with the reconstruction after 90% of the city burned to the ground. Now, previous to that, transportation technology did not allow building materials to go up the steep grade of what was called Eden Hill. Once they could get materials up and down the hill, they started building on the hill. The popular style of construction at the time was the Queen Anne style, so the people who were left to stay downtown started kind of mocking the people that were moving up to Eden Hill, saying, "Oh, you live in Queen Anne town." The Queen Anne part stuck and Eden Hill became Queen Anne Hill. Now just up off the starboard bow, we're going to be going by what looks like a couple of fishing nets in the water. Those are actually salmon pens, and they're used to help protect salmon fingerling. Roughly 500,000 fingerlings will be in those pens over the course of the next couple of months. They're being raised and kept protected so they can be strong enough to make the run from here to the oceans in the next few months. Just past those pens, we're going to be going by the pier that distributes Seattle's largest export by volume. It's not anything you would normally think of as coming from Seattle. It's actually cattle-grade grain. All that grain is brought from the Midwest up over the Rockies and Cascades by train. It's put in the 68 grain elevators, grain silos back behind the pier here. Moved by that long diagonal conveyor belt up and across the apparatus and gravity fed down into the holds of the vessel. It's parked in front of it. That's known as a bulk carrier because it carries a whole lot of one thing. Now the holds themselves are big, open, and empty. Once the grain's fed in, it has to be distributed evenly throughout the entirety of the hold. Now the reason we bring all that grain up here to Seattle to then put it into these ships and move it across is because of our location on the globe. We are 1 full day sailing closer to the markets where we sell that grain in Eastern Asia than any other western port of the United States. And that helps the company save a whole lot of time, fuel, and reaches. Now just past all those grain silos, you can see kind of an arch structure. That's a footbridge that connects 2 different trail systems. The southern one runs all the way down into downtown Seattle. The one up to the runs north up through the Inner Bay and Magnolia neighborhoods. The bridge itself is built in the shape of a double helix or DNA strand, and that's because the campus next to it was originally owned by a biotech firm. That firm sold that campus, it's a 40-acre campus, to one of Seattle's internet giants. Now it's not Amazon or Microsoft. That campus is actually home to Expedia.com, or the Expedia Group. And they own about 250 other travel websites. They purchased that company from the biotech firm. Spent a couple of years revamping, remodeling, and constructing some new buildings, making the campus very nice for all of their employees. And they opened the entirety of it to their entire work staff in the second week of March of 2020. And then 2 days later, they sent everybody home. for a couple of years. They're still at about 75-80% capacity on most days of their workforce. Now, one of the things they did to help lure their workforce back is this public park out in front of their campus. They put a large amount of Wi-Fi repeaters throughout the entirety of the park, so there's full internet coverage in that park, and that allows their employees to come out and they can work on those steps or out here on the beach and have a great view of Elliott Bay while they're working. Just past the Expedia campus, we're going to be going by Smith Cove. Now, Smith Cove is home to piers 90 and 91. When they were finished in the early 1920s, they were amongst the largest concrete piers in the world. Smith Cove is used by the U.S. military for a number of years as an embarkation point. After the military left, they were revamped one more time into their kind of current configuration. So Pier 90 is this first one we're going by here, is one with all the tan buildings on it. And most of those buildings are cold storage. They're used to house the catch from the Western Pacific and Alaskan fishing fleets. Most of what those fishing fleets catch is a fish known as Alaskan pollock. Now, if you eat fish, I can almost guarantee that you've had Alaskan pollock, because it's one of those products that's used whenever a company wants to make a product that has fish in it, but doesn't tell you what kind of fish it is. If you've ever had fish sticks or fillet of fish or surimi, that is all made from Alaskan pollock. Now, this next pier here is Pier 91. During cruise season, this is our second cruise ship terminal. When it's not cruise season, it's used for overflow parking for those fishing fleets as well as research vessels, like the one that's currently at port there. It's based out of Alaska. Now, when this was finished and being converted into a cruise ship terminal in the mid-2000s, it was one of the very few cruise ship terminals that had what's called shore tide. What that means is when the giant cruise ships can come in, they plug directly into the city's power grid. They can maintain full operations while turning on their giant diesel engines while they're got a forest of white mass over there. That is Elliott Bay Marina. It's the largest private marina here in Seattle. Back behind it are the bluffs of Magnolia. Now, the Magnolia District is named that because during the naval survey of the Puget Sound, a gentleman by the name of George Davidson stood on the deck of a boat clear across the sound over by Bainbridge Island, which is that bit of land across the water from us. He looked at the bluffs and he saw a large amount of red bark trees. Now, the only red bark trees he knew of were magnolia trees, so those must be magnolia trees, therefore that's the Magnolia District of the Puget Sound. Turns out, magnolia trees are not native to the Puget Sound or the Pacific Northwest. They grow very well here, but they're not native to the area. What you saw were a bunch of madrona trees. But by the time anybody actually got there and figured it out, it was too late. It was on the survey as Magnolia neighborhood. Now, we're going to turn and we're going to be heading south, and that means we're going across the mouth of Elliott Bay. For simplicity's sake, we'll say everything off of the left-hand or port side of the boat is Elliott Bay, and everything off the right or starboard side of the boat is the Puget Sound. Technically same body of water, but a bay is a protected body of water protected on three sides by land. The Sound is a large body of water that has at least two entrances or exits to an ocean. Now, the Puget Sound itself was carved by glacial action in the last ice age. The glaciers came through, they cut very, very deep, and they left about 300 islands here in the Sound. Like I said, this is connected directly to the Pacific Ocean, so this is salt water that we're going over. And again, it's also very, very deep. The average depth of the Puget Sound is roughly 600 feet deep. We are connected to the Pacific Ocean, which means that we are subject to the tides of the Pacific, which means we get 2 high tides and 2 low tides every day. We have a roughly 17-foot tidal swing. I said that there are roughly 300 islands here in the Sound. Almost all those islands are inhabited. Like Bainbridge Island, which is just across the water on the starboard side from us, has around 23 to 25,000 inhabitants. Almost all of them work over here in the greater Seattle area. What you don't see between here and there is a bridge. And that's because of those two things I mentioned before. One is the depth of the Puget Sound. For a 600-foot deep body of water, if you were to build a suspension-style bridge, you would need uprights that were about 1,200 feet tall, if not taller. That's fairly impractical to build. We could use a floating bridge, but there are a couple of other problems. One is that salt water I mentioned. It's very hard on the mechanics of a floating bridge. Two is that tidal sway. That 17-foot tidal sway is also very hard on the mechanics of a floating bridge. And three, Seattle is regularly one of the 5 busiest ports in the United States. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour to open and close a floating bridge, so 24 inconveniently timed vessels would mean that bridge never closed, and negate the whole point of having a bridge here in the first place. Now, how we get people back and forth from the islands to the mainlands on the Sound is the Washington State Ferry System. If we look off the bow, off kind of the port side there, you can see one of our ferries actually leaving its dock in downtown Seattle. As it comes, there's actually one directly in front of us, just a little bit off the starboard bow. Now, if you look at those ferries, you'll notice something kind of interesting. They are double-ended or mirrored. There's a wheelhouse and a propeller on either end of the boat, and that means they never have to turn around in their journeys. They pull directly into their docks, offload their passengers, load new ones, and then pull directly back out. They carry vehicles as well as foot passengers. The largest ones can hold almost 300 vehicles. All right. All service leaving off the right hand or starboard side of the boat. If you look over off the port side of the vessel and the left-hand side of the boat, you can see almost the entirety of our skyline, all relative to itself. And if we're going to talk about the skyline of Seattle, one of the things we should talk about first is, of course, the Space Needle. Now, it was constructed as the centerpiece for that 1962 World's Fair I mentioned. It took 400 days to build it, and it was designed to inspire architects of the future to do something interesting with skyscrapers. It wasn't meant to be the skyscraper of the future because it's 605 feet tall but only has 5 usable floors, which is kind of an egregious waste of space. And for those of you that really like visuals, if you were to pick up the Space Needle and drop it off the water off to our starboard or right-hand side, the only thing you would see of the needle is the last 5 feet of the spire at the top and the red blinking light. It's 605 feet tall. The water off our starboard side is roughly 600 feet deep. Now, it took 400 days to build it. It was finished in time for the opening of the fair, unlike the Edgewater, which is barely. You can't build any tall buildings near it, so it maintains its prominence. And 2, it's built on a hill. It's 605 feet tall. Now, the next tall building that went into the Seattle skyline was actually all the way down at the southern end of the city. Kind of nestled amidst all those other skyscrapers. You can see that black box, and that's the Safeco Tower. Now, the Safeco Tower is 630 feet tall. None of these other tall buildings were there. There was literally the Space Needle and then the tower. It's just kind of a plain black box. So the locals here started calling it the box the Space Needle came in because it's only 25 feet taller than the Space Needle itself. Currently the tallest building here in Seattle, if you look all the way down to the southern end of the city, there is a black monolithic building. It's got a bit of a curve to it. And that's the Columbia Center. Now the Columbia Center is 967 feet tall. It's got a flagpole on top that is 30 feet, which brings its entire height to 997 feet total. It is 76 stories. The 76 stories and 967 feet is very bad math. The FAA strongly recommends you do not build a building over 1,000 feet tall in downtown Seattle, because if you do, they have to alter the flight plans of every plane going into and out of both of those airports, and they don't want to do that. Now they can't fly with every plane that goes by, but what they can do is keep you warm so long your building never gets built. So when they saw the plans for the 76-story Columbia Center, the FAA called the owners and asked them, could you not build it that tall? We don't want to have to go through this. The owners said, absolutely. And then immediately called their architects, because they had already sold each and every one of those 76 stories to somebody else and didn't want to be sued for breach of contract. So told the architects what problems they were having. The architects went back to the drawing board and came up with a rather interesting idea. They took 6 inches or 1 stair step off of each and every one of those 76 stories, and it brought its height from well over 1,000 feet down to the 967 feet I mentioned, and created the shortest, tallest building on the West Coast, as there are no buildings over 76 stories on the West Coast, but there are buildings that are over 1,000 feet tall. Here we're getting a bit of a wig, so everybody kind of study yourselves if you're up and about. So just about the halfway point of the tour, I'm going to get off the microphone for a minute. It's a good time to use the restrooms or visit the tour again. I'll be walking around if you have any questions on something I said or didn't say, and I'll get back on the microphone.